All right, friends, so Mike Johnson is the Republican Speaker of the House, and ostensibly this makes him the most powerful elected Republican in the United States. But Mike Johnson, like every other elected Republican, tends not to wear power very well, and their position really doesn't manifest itself if you look at the constant strain and stress that they're under. Kevin McCarthy, Johnson's predecessor, didn't look particularly powerful, even though he was also the Speaker of the House and second in line of presidential succession, right? That's because Republicans don't really know how to wield power responsibly. And what we're seeing now, again, is the continuation of an ongoing MAGA civil war that at times has, peaked and dropped, but it's ongoing, right? We've seen it ever since Republicans took the majority in the House of Representatives back in January 2023. And now Mike Johnson is one of the primary belligerents. And things aren't going great for Johnson at the moment. And because he ultimately agreed to fund the federal government for the next 6 months, ending the ongoing, continuing resolution, the kicking of the can down the road in terms of government funding, he really made certain far-right Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene very mad because they view a functioning government as a political victory for President Biden and the Democrats. And so in the aftermath of that arrangement where Johnson threw it, basically he threw in the towel to the Democrats and said, okay, we're going to keep the government funded for the next 6 months, which is the responsible thing to do. Marjorie Taylor Greene issued a formal motion to vacate. And all it takes is one person to really pull the trigger on this. And potentially Mike Johnson will go the way of Kevin McCarthy. Now, Greene has not pulled the trigger on it yet. She's issued the threat. She says the motion's been filed, but she's not prepared to again act on it yet. And she's, issuing these public vague threats that Mike Johnson better get his act together or we're going to remove him. And she says, I'm putting him on notice, right? This is obviously adding quite a bit to Mike Johnson's stress. So he went down to Mar-a-Lago under the cover of a joint press conference with Donald Trump about election integrity, which we'll talk about in a different video. But during the Q&A session at the end of the press conference, Donald Trump was asked about this situation, this MAGA civil war, and this is what he had to say.
We're getting along very well with the speaker, and I get along very well with Marjorie. We have a speaker. He was voted in, and it was a complicated process, and I think it's not an easy situation for any speaker. I think he's doing a very good job. He's doing about as good as you're going to do. And I'm sure that Marjorie understands that. She's a very good friend of mine, and I know she has a lot of respect for the speaker.
So again, just a bunch of empty platitudes, nothing substantive. I like Mike Johnson because Mike Johnson likes me. He's come down here and kissed the ring and bent the knee. And I'm sure Marjorie Taylor Greene likes Mike Johnson too. So yeah, about that.
Close because they see me up close. They know I mean exactly every single word I say, and I'm not full of shit just like Mike Johnson is, and I'm actually going to follow through with actions instead of lie to people on television and in press conferences and out on the campaign trail.
Now listen, people have different love languages. I like to tease those I care about. I like to pick on them. I like to be picked on in return. So I suppose this is just like banter of some sort, but that doesn't sound like respect to me. Now, Donald Trump may not understand what respect is, given that he's very much not respected by the majority of the country. Certainly, he enjoys the adoration of his cult. But when you say that someone is full of shit and that they lie and that they don't follow through on their promises with actions, that sounds like disrespect, right? Now, so obviously this is wishful thinking from Donald Trump. But hey, in Trump's defense, he runs a cult, right? So he's probably thinking, well, if I issue this public proclamation, and Marjorie Taylor Greene will probably hear it, or I was going to say read it, but she doesn't read very well, obviously, even though she ostensibly wrote a book. But surely someone will convey these words to her, and that will cause an about face. We'll get to Marjorie Taylor Greene's post-press conference response to see if there was any change in her tone and in her approach to Speaker Mike Johnson. But this is what Mike Johnson had to say a few days later on the Fox Propaganda Network when they asked him about, again, this ongoing civil war between him and Marjorie Taylor Greene and just the overall situation. And this is what Johnson had to say.
Did you speak with President Trump privately about what Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing?
I spent hours with the president on Friday. He and I talked frequently, many times. usually in a week. We had a long relationship. He's 100% with me, and he said, we'll get this job done. That's a distraction. What Marjorie's done with the motion to vacate is not helpful for our party, for our mission to save the country, because if we don't grow the House majority, keep the House majority, win the Senate, and win back the White House for President Trump, we're going to lose the republic. You know, Maria, we often say the next election cycle is the most important one in our lifetime. Everyone knows this is for all the marbles. People are fed up. The American people are fed up. President Biden's open borders with his inflation and the cost of living and the out-of-control spending, the weakness on the world stage and the weaponization of the government, we have to stop it. What we need to do right now, and we will be, our party needs to stay united. We need to go out and tell the American people how we'll be different. Not just what we're against, but what we're for, what our agenda is going to be, and how we're going to turn this country around. I'm absolutely bullish on the election cycle. I think we're going to.
Yeah, so I mean, again, all that sounds good. And I've told you in previous videos, folks, that the math certainly doesn't change. I mean, Mike Johnson is right in certain respects that he has to make concessions that infuriate Marjorie Taylor Greene and others. And himself, he says he doesn't like the concessions that he often has to make. But he recognizes that a government shutdown would be bad for Republicans because the American people would, historically speaking, blame Republicans, as well they should, because it would be exclusively the fault of Republicans. And because they don't have the leverage to dictate terms to the president, President Biden, and the Democrats, that they have to make concessions far more often than not. Now, that's the reality of somebody who at least understands the situation. But Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't, right? She, like every other deranged cultish fanatic, wants everything, and she thinks that she's the powerful one, even though she's not, compared to certainly President Biden and really a lot of other people. She thinks she should be the one to dictate terms to them, and that's just not how it works.